But we begin with these live pictures. Look at this. This is Tahrir Square in Cairo. These are live pictures coming in not far from the United States Embassy. Once again, the protests escalating even as we speak. Earlier in the day, it had been relatively, keyword, relatively quiet, but now seems to be escalating for some reason. Our own Ben Wiedemann is on the ground for us. We're going to be going to him shortly. At the same time as these scenes are unfolding, there also have been frightening scenes of violence and hatred directed at the United States and others around the region. It's spreading, and U.S. officials are very worried. Sources tell me they're especially concerned about today's penetration of the United States Embassy in Tunisia and the reports that the American school in Tunis was actually burned. Remember, the Arab Spring began with such great hope in Tunisia. They're also deeply concerned because other Western nations have become targets as well. Today, mobs in Khartoum in the Sudan attacked the U.S., German, and British embassies. And as we see in these live pictures happening in Egypt, we see some running battles continuing now between demonstrators and police firing tear gas, even though Egypt's powerful Muslim Brotherhood actually called off nationwide protests. Militants also breached an international peacekeeping base in Egypt's northern Sinai, burning trucks and a watchtower. Some 1,500 international peacekeepers have been there since 1981, including 700 U.S. troops. They are there right now. Some of them have been injured, we're told. This is an extremely volatile and dangerous situation unfolding in Sinai right now as well. Our sources also say the U.S. is paying very close attention to what's happening in Gaza. Reuters is reporting at least 30,000 Palestinians burned U.S. flags and beat an effigy of President Obama. As for security at U.S. embassies, a senior administration official is now telling CNN, and I'm quoting, now we are in a full court press. The official says security is in place at every single post in the Middle East and anywhere there's a chance of demonstrations. Our foreign affairs reporter Elise Labott has been looking into this part of the story for us. Elise, very worrisome. What's the latest as far as protecting American diplomats around the region?
Well, there's been a lot of talk, Wolf, about protecting American diplomats and American facilities, and in addition to making sure that the U.S. has all personnel it needs and working with the host governments in terms of providing extra security, extra barriers, things like that at the embassy. They're also very concerned about U.S. Americans around the world and what the Americans can do. They're urging all Americans, Wolf, that are in the region to log on to the State Department website. They have a lot of travel information. That's travel.state.gov. We're going to put that up on our screen for our viewers to make sure that they have the latest information to keep themselves safe. They're saying, Wolf, stay away from embassies right now, not so safe to be. Keep a low profile, avoid these demonstrations where these crowds can get out of hand, and also might not be a good idea to frequent areas where Westerners are in some countries, but every individual country's website has the latest security information for Americans. Well,
have you heard any reports of actual evacuations, either of U.S. government personnel or private American citizens?
Well, we know that all U.S. personnel have been evacuated from Benghazi, Libya, and very small skeletal staffs in Tripoli and also Yemen. But the U.S. is looking at other countries, and some of these, we have 10 countries that you just mentioned where there are U.S. protests. Clearly, they're looking at Tunis, looking at Sudan right now. Right now, they're not evacuating people, but again, they're saying stay tuned. Make sure that you're registered with the embassy. Right now, everyone's relying on commercial travel to get out. The roads are open. Everything's open, Wolf. Right now, it just seems to be localized just at these U.S. embassies and not kind of chaos spreading throughout the country.
And these are live pictures we're showing our viewers now from Tahrir Square in Cairo, not very far from the U.S. Embassy. You've been there. I've been there. It's, only a few, maybe a block away, but they've apparently established all sorts of barriers around the U.S. Embassy to protect the Americans. This is a huge embassy, too.
It's a huge embassy. It's like a complex, if you will. But even as they have this setback and these reinforcements, they're asking the local government, in the last couple of days, they have a little bit of trouble with the government in terms of getting the security needed. But now they say that the government is reinforcing the roads, closing roads, things like that.
And these are, once again, live pictures we're showing our viewers from Cairo. Elise, I know you're reporting on this, so stand by. We'll get back to you. The unrest also has been growing since Tuesday when outrage over a crude video mocking the Prophet Muhammad sparked rioting in Egypt and a deadly attack on the U.S. consulate in Benghazi, Libya. CNN's Arwa Damon is where it all started in Benghazi. Arwa's joining us now live. What's the latest, Arwa? What's going on?
Well, at this point in time, the situation in Benghazi is incredibly tense. Everyone who we've been speaking to really expressing their outrage, their horror at what took place, but also demanding that the Libyan government take concrete action to try to bring about an end to these armed militias, effectively, that operate with pretty much complete and total impunity. We were touring the site of the consulate earlier today, and there we saw the country's president, the head of the National Council, Congress rather, and he was saying, though, that at this point in time, the government quite simply does not necessarily have the capabilities to rein these individuals, these militias in. And this is, of course, of a growing concern for the population here and of growing concern for all of the international observers. If the current Libyan government is not capable of taking these weapons off the streets, of controlling these extremist groups, one can only imagine what the future of this country is going to end up being, Wolf.
And we're showing our video that you and your team has sent us. These are pictures from inside what was the United States consulate in Benghazi that was attacked. And it's pretty devastating when you see it described, because you walked through what's left of this diplomatic mission. Walk us through what you saw.
You know, Wolf, is very much like walking through a scene of a horror movie to a certain degree. There's debris all over the place. A number of the buildings have been burned, walls are scorched. You find bits and pieces of lives and that once were. There were boxes of made, ready-eat meals that had been discarded. There were bits and pieces of paper, some notes. The location had been looted, though, following the assault that took place. It really wasn't secured by Libyan security forces, and it was very much a free-for-all, so not a lot was left behind, and quite surprisingly, the location wasn't actually secured. It's not like one would imagine that this being a crime scene, that it would have been completely locked off. The government is actually asking for help from the United States, from the international community when it comes to figuring out exactly what transpired, but more importantly, trying to prevent this from taking place in the future. We stood inside the room where we believe the ambassador died, and that was just an utterly hair-raising experience. Along some of the walls, not necessarily in that particular room, but some of the other walls, there were blood stains. There was a partial handprint on one of them. So it most certainly is yet another one of those horrific aftermaths that one walks through and can't help but to be disgusted by what transpired and also horrified by what those moments must have really been like.
I understand, Arwa, that there were actual two scenes of anti-U.S. violence at what was the consulate, but also what was being described as a safe house. Do your sources there on the ground have good insight in how those two American Navy SEALs who were there with the ambassador were actually killed and where they were killed?
We're still really just beginning to piece this all together. I did, however, speak with the spokesman for one of the battalions here. You had that initial assault on the consulate, and it seems as if with the chaos and when the first grenade or rocket-propelled grenade impacted, the lights all went out. There was smoke billowing. It seems as if somehow the ambassador and perhaps some others were separated from the main group. Now, after the sustained gun battle, members of the 17th of February Brigade, a Libyan brigade, were somehow able to evacuate them to the safe house. And this is where it gets incredibly disturbing, because some are saying there must have been insider information, a leak somewhere, because when the rescue team finally arrived from Tripoli, numbering, we are told, 7 to 8 security personnel, the minute that they arrived on scene of the so-called safe house, they were attacked. It was a very intense, quick hit-and-run attack. But it is very disturbing that these two attacks happened one after the other, especially since the second took place at what should have been a safe house. Exactly where those security personnel were killed. We're still trying to piece all of that together. One individual who we were speaking to say that when they initially arrived at the safe house following this brief clash, intense clash though, that took place, they were able to recover the embassy personnel and some of the bodies. Two of the bodies we were initially told of those who were killed. Of course, they then later on found the ambassador's body, according to eyewitnesses and sources here at the hospital. But there's still a lot of gaps, Wolf, and a lot of questions at this point in time, not just questions for the Libyan government. Why, for example, were forces not responding to the initial attack, but questions for the U.S. as well. Did America perhaps underestimate the level of threat that existed here? When it comes to the Libyans, they fully believe that this was a pre-planned assault intended to wreak maximum damage the relationship between Libya and the United States, Wolf.
And do they believe it was a coincidence or deliberate that it occurred on the 11th anniversary of 9/11?
Those officials who we have spoken to, in fact, the country's president himself does say that he firmly 100% believes that they were timed to take place on 9/11, Wolf.
And there are still elements, as Mike Rogers, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, told me this week, there are still elements, pockets of al-Qaeda terrorists roaming around not only Libya, but Tunisia as well. And that's a very worrisome development. What are you hearing about that?
There are a number of extremist groups that operate inside Libya, a lot of them really operating out of the east. I have heard it described as them having their bases of operation, their training camps in the eastern deserts, but they do tend to carry out their attacks here in Benghazi. This attack on the consulate is not an isolated incident. There have been attacks on Western interests in this city over the last few months. There was an attack on the ICRC. There was an attack on the British ambassador's convoy. There have been a number of other isolated incidents. Some of these groups are affiliated with al-Qaeda, others are not, but the thing that is of great concern here, Wolf, is the amount of impunity, the way that they are able to operate at will, carry out attacks such as the one that we saw take place with such devastating and horrific consequences, and have a government in place that admits that it is not capable of reining them in. The great concern, and this is coming from some of the military commanders here, is that they're absolutely terrified of the security situation as it currently exists, not to mention how fearful they are of how the situation may in fact deteriorate.
Arwa, I want you and our entire team to be very, very careful over there. Security obviously comes first, but we will touch back with you shortly. Arwa Damon is on the ground in Benghazi for us, where those 4 Americans, including the U.S. ambassador and 2 Navy SEALs, were killed on the 11th anniversary of 9/11. Meanwhile, even as we speak right now, I want to show you live pictures from Cairo's Tahrir Square, only about 300 yards or so from the U.S. Embassy, a huge U.S. Embassy. The protests escalating there. You can see what's going on. These are live pictures. We're going to Cairo when we come back.